It's been 41 days now that protesters have been camping out in Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan. That's the Occupy part of Occupy Wall Street, a physical presence taking up space and not going home. Along with their sleeping bags and their signs, protesters have organized the small park into a miniature city, really, with a communal kitchen, a library, a media center, and generators to keep laptops and cell phones charged. Well, they used to have generators, past tense. This morning, city firefighters confiscated 6 generators and about a dozen cans of fuel used to run them. New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg said they were safety hazards and illegal, and thus they had to go. So if living in a park indefinitely wasn't already toughing it out, now protesters will have to make do without any heat or electricity. Protesters are vowing to stay no matter the weather. Which is kind of the point. These protests all have the word Occupy in their name. They're not demonstrations that end. There are no flyers that say, show up on this day and on this day only and then go home. There are no buses that bring people and wait. No list of demands, no political parties, no candidates. This is an ongoing thing. This is part of the power of it. People demonstrating that in our digital, virtually there world, there is a commitment here to staying, a physical commitment to bodily being there, to being in the way, to saying we are not leaving here until this is dealt with, even if you make that hard to do. A few miles north of Wall Street, demonstrators also gathered this afternoon on the steps of the New York Public Library. They marched from there to the Bank of America Tower and on to other too-big-to-fail bank buildings in Midtown Manhattan. Our producer Julia Nutter shot this video as the protesters handed out stacks of what organizers said were 6,000 letters to bankers that they had collected. Like this one, spread the wealth fairly. No one's denying you should make a profit. We're just asking you not to mess with us while doing it. The protesters folded their letters up into paper airplanes and launched them toward the Bank of America building above. Paper airplane aerodynamics, difficult to achieve in the best of circumstances, but especially when you're trying to do it up and in unison. At Occupy Oakland in California, about 36 tents have sprung up overnight in the same place where police had torn down an Occupy Oakland encampment earlier this week. Flowers and thousands of cards have flooded the Oakland hospital, where Iraq war veteran Marine Scott Olson is recovering from the fractured skull he incurred during Tuesday night's violent raid by Oakland police. Doctors say Scott Olson's experiencing pressure on the lobe of his brain that controls speech, but they say they are optimistic for his recovery. Oakland's mayor, Jean Quan, has met with Mr. Olson and his family and apologized for the violence at the police raid. But when she tried to address the protesters at a vigil last night, she was booed. She then wrote the group a written statement that said, in part, I cannot change the past, but I want to work with you to ensure that this remains peaceful going forward. At Occupy Nashville in Tennessee, 29 people were arrested when state troopers moved in overnight to enforce a newly enacted state policy that set a curfew for the grounds near the state capitol, where the protesters have been staying in tents for nearly 3 weeks. Interestingly, a night judge refused to sign the arrest warrants because the curfew policy had only been in effect for a couple of hours since yesterday afternoon before police decided to enforce it. The protesters were issued misdemeanor citations, holding them up in this group photo this morning after they got sprung from jail. Occupy San Diego protesters were also kicked out today, their tents and other gear confiscated in a massive San Diego police sweep overnight. 51 people arrested. The protesters said they were given no warning. We are the 99% protests. Occupy protests have spread to Britain, to Canada, to Germany, Japan, Slovenia, Australia, Tehran. Yes, that Tehran, as in Tehran, where protesting can be a deadly business. And now Egypt. Look at these pictures. Protesters marching today in Cairo's Tahrir Square in support of Occupy Oakland. Geographic spread and mass participation is one way to quantify the resonance of a protest movement. Here's another. In the month before the Occupy Wall Street movement, a Nexus search says that in the U.S. mainstream media, the phrase corporate greed was mentioned 164 times. So that's before Occupy Wall Street. In a month, 164 mentions. But in the last month since Occupy Wall Street, there have been more than 3,000 mentions in the mainstream media. How many more than 3,000? We do not know, because Nexus will not return more than 3,000 searches.
As you know, in Lower Manhattan and in cities across this country, we have people who spent a cold night outside because they are committed to this cause. They are the 99%ers, if you listen to their rallying cry. What's in these stats for them? What do you say to them about the effect of a good run on Wall Street, outside of which they're camped out?
That was the question. Occupy Wall Street, the 99% movement, has changed what the country is talking about. And while it has been at times unsettling to some that they are not focused on necessarily providing the answers, they have done something bigger than that. They have changed the questions that are being asked about our country, our economy, and what counts as success. They have changed the questions. And frankly, it seems like they are just getting started.